So in this one, I'm going to use a boat and some people on the boat to try to represent the soul, and I'm going to use kind of metaphors for mind and body. And what I want to basically do is lay out what I see as kind of the skillful posture of the soul, and then contrast that with less skillful postures of the soul. I think the practical benefit would be it could help us notice when we're kind of out of balance, when we're not really attending to life in the way that would be best for us. And it kind of, hopefully then on the plus side, provides a metaphor to kind of recognize when you are doing that, to give yourself some positive reinforcement and essentially kind of pray for that to continue. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to draw a boat. So we have here is the boat's wheel and the boat's throttle. We got someone standing there at the front. Then we've got someone who's kind of hanging off the back of the boat. We've got someone who's kind of hanging off the front. We've got someone here who's standing in the boat and is looking upwards at the sky. And then there is a glass bottom to this boat. Someone is laying down in the boat. Looking down. Okay, and then the last one I'm going to add, I'll see if I can squeeze this person in here. I'm going to use a narrower marker for this one. So this one is going to be kind of maybe an odd one out. It's essentially a gunner. And there's a little machine gun they've got. And what's maybe a little bizarre or unusual about this gunner, the gunner's kind of an angry one, likes to shoot around anything that seems out of whack. But the gunner does not realize that the gunner has a mirror in front of the gunner. And so I'll come back to that in a little bit. So what we have here, the water line. Got a nice sun in the sky here. Alright. Some clouds, some birds. Okay, I think I've set my scene here. Okay, so in this metaphor, the sea or the lake, you know, whatever body of water this boat is moving through is, oh, let me add our little engine on the back here. Okay, so this here is the body, right, and this here is the mind. This boat here, right, is what I'll call the soul. And then the perspective that one can assume, right, would be what lowercase I. And so essentially, as we kind of move through these different perspectives on the boat, each of them is essentially lowercase I. It's a perspective that we as a conscious being can assume in the flow of time. And I'm going to kind of contrast them to kind of show the different roles they play. And our sun up there is going to be the light of awareness. Okay, so as the soul in its embodied experiences the flow of time, there's a bunch of different kind of perspectives or postures, outlooks the embodied being can assume and does habitually assume. And so I'm going to go through them and kind of point out kind of why I think we assume these different perspectives, kind of the upsides and downsides of each. And then I'm going to draw a couple contrasts. So the first one we'll deal with is here, right? This person on the back of the boat looking backwards. So they're looking, this one's looking in the direction that the boat came from, right? So looking backwards, kind of, this here's kind of the wake of the boat coming off. This person's looking back. And this is the one who's focused on the past, right? In my little terminology, I call that re-tending. And we look back perhaps out of nostalgia, we look back perhaps out of regret, we look back to try to learn from the past, something like that. We could see, though, the downside here is there's a fixation, right? And so with these four here, 1, 2, 3, 4, one of the downsides to their posture is that they're fixated, right? They're fixated in a certain pose. They're looking at a certain band of what is being lit by the light of awareness, but at the expense of a wholer view that's able to see the rest. So that's the person looking in the past. They are retending. This person looking forward, right, is trying to look into the future, the direction the boat is moving. Right, in my terminology, I call that pretending. They may be looking forward in hope, they may be looking forward in dread, they may be looking forward in curiosity, they may be looking forward in speculation. But again, the limitation is the same because they are fixated on a certain aspect of the whole at the expense of the rest, right? They're only seeing a limited band. It's like they're kind of looking with blinders on. Now this one here, right, is on the boat, and maybe their eyes aren't so big there, but they're looking upwards, right? And what they're looking up to is into the sky of the mind. They may be looking there to get an idea, to try to get inspiration, to try to get suggestions. They may be looking back, looking up into the mind and kind of backwards to try to recall something from the past. They may be kind of looking up and forwards to try to speculate about something in the future. But the key is, just like the other perspectives, right? They've got their blinders on, they've kind of got their little maybe cone from the veterinarian's office on, and they are looking only at a limited band. In this case, they're looking up into mental activity, mental concepts. Now this one here is doing the opposite, right? They're in the belly of the ship, and they're looking down into the body. They may be looking down to see how the body is feeling, if the body's feeling pain or pleasure, to see if the body is having any needs or desires. They may be looking for tightness in the body, pulsing in the body, things like that. And again, same thing, because there's a fixation, there's a narrow band of attention, and so while they have a really tightened and heightened sense of what's going on here, kind of a microscopic clicking in, that's at the expense of all the rest of this information that's available. And so what I think is these four postures are kind of the postures of a mind that kind of gets stuck in its wandering, or I use the word mind, maybe what I should say instead is a soul or perspective that gets stuck in a certain outlook on things, right? Because of course there are times when it's healthy and wise to look back in the past, to look into our bodies, to look forward into the future, to look up into our mind. The difference though is if we get fixated, we get stuck, right? That's unhealthy, right? That can be costly. And if we're doing it compulsively, right, that can be a problem. If we're really desiring to keep a look at our surroundings, to be present, but we just keep slipping out of that and slipping into the mind or slipping into the past, right? That's not healthy, that's not helpful for us either. Then we're not really feeling like we're in flow in our lives, that we have any sense of control in our perspective. We're essentially kind of a slave or at the mercy of our compulsions. The healthier approach is to do it consciously and conscientiously, right? With some deliberation, with some purpose, and with the freedom to be able to do it for as long as feels healthy, and then to stop doing it when it no longer seems healthy. And that does require that consciousness and that conscientiousness to keep that perspective and to be honest with ourselves about whether we've sunken into a fixation or not. Now, these two up here, right, these ones here were fixed. These two here are swivelers, right? These ones can look in any different direction at any time. And so that's an advantage, obviously, over kind of the fixated position we may find ourselves in, because again, you can get a panoramic view. This one can look back if it's healthy to, can look up if they want to, can look forward, can look down, can attend to the boat. And so that's an advantage, right? But let's focus here for a moment on this gunner, right? So this gunner is what's representing for me kind of what you might call ego, and in particular kind of a hostile, negative, aggressive ego, the ego that sees things as threats, that sees things as menace, that sees things as obstacles to be removed. And so that's why it's got its little gun. It shoots whatever it sees as the enemy or that's wrong. An issue though here is because this guy, you know, I'm picturing here kind of like a helmet or something like that that has a convex mirror on it, kind of like a rear view mirror in a car, but it's strapped in front of the face. And what's happening is when the gunner sees something in its reflection, right, it may be looking back in the mirror and looking at this one, and it may go, you're the problem, you're the threat, I don't like you. The problem though is the gunner then pulls the trigger and shoots in the exact opposite direction, right? So trying to shoot this one, the gunner shoots this one. And vice versa, the gunner may swivel around. The gunner may look off the boat, right, to another being doing their thing, see them, feel triggered, get angry, right? But what's the problem, right? When the gunner is seeing, say, another boat that's over here, right, so to the ship's starboard or to the right, if the gunner is seeing that, that means the gunner is actually facing to port, facing left. Why? Because that's how the gunner out of the rear view mirror is able to see that. And so the gunner starts shooting, thinking the gunner's taking down a perceived enemy at starboard, and then the gunner is just shooting wildly to port. And what this represents for me, and I really got a lot of inspiration for this general conception of things from the teacher Byron Katie, is that when we're dealing with the ego, we're really always dealing with a mirror game. The ego is always misdirecting its anger and its frustrations and its demands. And the general direction it does is it really takes the messages that are intended to go to us, right, our own kind of self-teaching, and it essentially blasts them out at other people, especially the people we love or people who find ways to kind of get under our skin, right? The ego will just unload on them, volcanically dump on them. But what you can be sure of is that lava, right, and those flaming hot rocks that are spewing out, those are really messages that the ego in wisdom would be giving gently within, right? Perhaps a little firmly to make sure that we're hearing the message if it's something that we've been ignoring for a long time, but calmly, right, peacefully. And I think the opposite happens too. I think there's sometimes things that the ego sees, right, that we see from within as opportunities to help other people and to heal other people. But we do that flip thing and we start imposing that on ourselves. We start essentially projecting that back into us. And so essentially we're taking other people's, not problems, but really more confusion, and we then basically project it back into ourselves. So now we're not only dealing with our own kind of homegrown confusion, we're dealing with this other confusion that the ego has brought in, again, because it's looking in the mirror and getting things exactly backwards. So as you can imagine, if this guy has free reign, your boat's going to end up full of bullet holes and is going to sink eventually, because it's just going to wildly start attacking all kinds of things, and its attacks are going to go 180 degrees in the wrong direction. So you're going to end up with a lot of trouble. I think it leaves by process of elimination the one that's left, which is, the captain of the ship. And what I think is, the benefit of this position, why this posture here on the ship of the soul, why this is where we want our eye to be, is because at this place we have the ability, we have essentially freedom for attention and intention, right? And we've got the throttle here so that we can move the boat more quickly or more slowly in whatever direction we're choosing. And we have the wheel, right, with the rudder on the back to help determine which direction to go. And this for me is kind of like in life, we're always having to decide, right, because we have finite wetware brains, we cannot pay attention equally to everything simultaneously and fully absorb the information, right? We have a limited bandwidth. So what we need to do is to be wise about where we're directing it, right? And then we also need to be wise with what intention we're bringing toward it. Are we directing our attention towards something and intending hostility? Are we directing our attention towards someone and intending to dominate or manipulate them? So the the person in the captain's chair has the freedom, because they've got the wheel, because they've got the throttle, and because they've got the ability to look in any direction these other fixed positions are doing. They're the one who's best suited to skillfully deploy attention and intention in ways that are healthy for us. And so what I think we can do throughout our day is we can just try to kind of notice, have situational awareness, and within ourselves in honesty about what we're up to and what we're doing. We may notice that we're really just absorbed in our own bodies, neglecting our minds, right? Maybe there is something in our future, an event coming up, something important that we know we want to give a little conscientious and conscious attention to, but we're too fixated in the body to do it, right? The position, the wise choice isn't to switch from here to here, right? This is something I think we do, is we jump around between our fixated positions, never giving ourselves the freedom to be in the captain's seat. The captain's seat is something I think you find when you meditate. It's something I think you find when you're engaged in contemplation. I think if you have a moment that feels kind of spacious, feels open, feels free, that's kind of a sign you're in the captain's chair. And one way you can test it is, can you float freely, right, between different possibilities, right? Can you move between tasks with fluidity without getting stuck in a certain way, right? Can you move between operations of the mind, operations of the body, between conversations, right? Between being active and between being inactive. And if there's a fluidity to that process, if we're not feeling a lot of chafing, a lot of friction, we're not feeling like we're ripping ourselves away from something that we're fixated on, that's a sign that we're in our captain's position. We're kind of in that posture where we want to be, where we really should be. And so we could breathe a sigh of relief, right? Pray to remain in that position, and then just maintain kind of an open situational awareness and honesty about when we've slipped into these other postures. And there was a quote I got today. I get an email from a website called Farnham Street, Farnam Street. A guy named Shane Parrish runs it. I find it really cool. And there was a quote in there. I'd already drawn this in my notebook this morning. And then I saw this, and I thought it meshed with it really well. And it's a quote from an NBA basketball player, Giannis Antetokounmpo. Apologies if I butchered the last name there. He's number 34 in the Milwaukee Bucks, NBA champion this year. And his quote was, "When you focus on the past, that's your ego. When I focus on the future, that's my pride." Let's see, I gotta get this right. I try to focus on the present. That's humility. So mapping that onto here, right, by Giannis's framing, we'd have ego, we'd have pride, and we'd have humility here. And humility, I think, is such a beautiful word. It's also a word I think that's really easy to misunderstand or put in the wrong connotation. So I think sometimes when we hear humility, we think modesty or even like submissiveness, putting oneself down. But humility, if we look at the root of the word, really means from the earth, right? Humus being a term for soil, right? It means we recognize we're creatures of earth. And what do all creatures on earth have in common, right? They kind of do things right sometimes, they do things wrong sometimes, right? They're fallible, but then they also do things sometimes that blow our minds and surpass our expectations. And so I think humility is a really beautiful mindset, posture, and energy to cultivate when we're in the captain's chair, because we get to remind ourselves of those twin truths, right? Yes, we do make mistakes, but we don't always make mistakes. And so that gives us the permission to acknowledge when we're making mistakes. But we also then don't beat ourselves up and constantly hamper ourselves down because we're so afraid to make mistakes. Because if we do that, we never get the freedom to actually do the things in our life and to succeed and to see our plans go through, to have this boat reach its port of call, reach its destination in a successful way. Let me see if there's anything else I have on my my thing here. Oh yeah, so I'll put one more kind of thought here. So when you're thinking about being the captain of the ship, it gives us an opportunity to think about two different modes we can be in terms of thinking and information processing. And one is the intuition, and then one is more kind of the discursive conscious mind. I think that maps, maybe not perfectly, but somewhat onto the subconscious and the conscious mind. And so the subconscious mind, right, intuition, is basically the procedural knowledge, right, the task knowledge of how this driver knows how to operate this boat. And a skilled driver, right, will be able to keep their eyes out on the water, right? They can look behind them if they want to, look to the left, look to the right, look up to check the sky and the weather conditions, look forward to see if there's anything in the boat's path, can even check down to the side, right and left, see if they make sure the hull's in good integrity, all those things. That is the conscious operation of the mind, right? Maybe the discursive operation of the mind. That's the mind in time gathering information, right? Redirecting attention and intention in a way to try to, you know, enjoy the experience and to get whatever data we need to operate our boat successfully. Intuition is kind of that hardwired information, that deep knowledge, how the throttle works, how the wheel works, how water works, how the boat works, how the weather works, how all those things interact to create this environment. Maybe things in the back of the mind, like how much fuel is left, how much time we have left, what speed is safe to use right now. If I see a boat in the distance, how long is it going to take me to reach it? These aren't computations that the discursive mind is doing, right? If it got caught up in all of that, it would have no attention or intention left to pay attention to the environment in real time. So instead, we have this intuition, right? This huge kind of computer that's whirring underneath the scenes, right? And I picture the intuition's operation kind of being down here in the gut and in the heart. And then the more discursive, right, attention, intention is up in the noodle brain, up in the skull. And so I think just another valuable lesson here, something we could take away from this, is remembering that when you're in your captain's chair, when you're operating well, another sign, right, in addition to this swivel ability, in addition to feeling like you've got your hands on the wheel and the throttle, is feeling like your intuition, right, and your discursive attention, your subconscious mind and your conscious mind are working together in harmony, right? They're working together in sync. When this one says, hey, we need to get some information on what's going forward, boom, the eyes almost instinctively look forward to get that information to the intuition. When this guy here begins to have a problem that's too much to compute, it trusts sending it down to the intuition, and the intuition to give it back when the time is right, instead of becoming absorbed in that concept up here, which then again takes attention away from the environment where it should be and puts it into processing here, which especially when you're moving at a boat at high speed across water with other watercraft in there, you don't want to be doing that, right? You want to have a full attention to your environment. So that's why really trusting what's good for the intuition to the intuition, and what's good for the discursive mind to the discursive mind. I'll just do one last thing, I guess, and then I'll wrap it up. So I use the lowercase I here to represent the perspective of the embodied being. That's really what I've been talking about the whole time, and saying this captain's posture is the posture that is the one we have when we're at our best, when we're most in flow, when we're being our healthiest. What you might say there is I've got awareness up here. You might swap that out for this uppercase I, which represents the spirit. Right? The spirit has this perspective that isn't embedded in the being. It seems like it's kind of at a remove, seeing things from above. And that spirit perspective, I believe, is tied to the intuition, because it's this perspective that allows for the consideration of multiple perspectives at once. The spirit can maybe see the boat that's up ahead here, right? Can be aware of maybe that there's an outcropping of rocks here, can be attending to the fact that this person is here, maybe they're getting hungry, right? If there's another person on the boat, it may be looking at them, keeping track of them, gauging what their mood is like, how they're handling things. And so this perspective, again, is very caught up in the operation of this individual being's mind and body. The spirit is really kind of this broader perspective that has the ability to consider a number of different beings, and even non-beings at a single time, and kind of array them in kind of a map or a schema. And that then is available through the intuition to the being, so that the being then, as they're driving with their hands on the wheel, is able to simultaneously kind of feel its landscape, feel its environment, and feel what all these different pieces are moving, and then set a course with attention and intention that accounts for the good of them all, right? Instead of just being fixated on the good of this individual being, it's attending to the good of the entire scene. And then God, right, which I'll represent with a G, would be all of this, the whole thing. And God would be a perspective of remove that sees, just as the spirit sees the physical world with this multi-lensed perspective, right, this multi-factor consideration, God then is able to do that with spirit, right? So you could have, say you had 3 different people on this boat. God is the perspective from which all these individual perspectives are considered, right? And God wants to promote harmony between them. Right? God wants to promote flourishing, wants to promote the easy flow of the free flow of love. And so it's like this extra layer of remove or upwardness, right? Lowercase I being connected to the individual. This obviously is concerned with things other than the individual, but in this scene is still feeding its information back through this individual to direct this individual's behavior. Here, right, each spirit would be driving a different person on the boat, and God would be like this, just as this is to this, God is to that. So God has the ability to see the perspective kind of above of multiple spirits, and then to feed them information that essentially allows them to coordinate their conduct in a way that's harmonious with each other. Okay, I'll stop it there.